Review and Scrutiny Panel, Environmental Communities and Partnerships. Just before we open the meeting, I'd just like to read out a statement.
We'll just put that sound.
The panel was saddened to hear of the passing of Councillor Graham Welton, who's been a member of the panel since 2022. Our thoughts and condolences with his family and his friends. So, moving on to apologies, we have an apology.
So we have an apology.
Thank you. So, on to the minutes of the meeting of the 6th of June. Anyone got any questions or comments? It is sorted. Has anyone got comments or questions? Issues with it? Sign it. So item 2, members' interest. Has anyone got a declaration of interest? Councillor Hunt.
I'd like to declare an interest against item 7, the local area energy plan. I am an employee of National Grid Electricity System Operator and a shareholder in National Grid PLC.
Thank you. So moving on to item 3, overview and scrutiny working programme.
Do we just want to bear with a second, just whilst we sort the technical?
We're just sorting out a technical issue for anyone who's online. Moving on to item 3, overview and scrutiny working programme. Everyone's had a good look at the programme. We know it is. Anyone got any comments about it? Councillor Auburn.
Thank you, Chair. Just a reminder of the frustrations that I know you share, because we've talked about it privately. There's ideas that have been put forward across the different groups. Councillor Hunt on Great Fen, Councillor Criswell on health, Councillor Harvey when she was on this panel on mental health, myself on various environmental issues, the local lettings plan. I think it'd be good to get an update for members and members of the public watching where we are on some of those issues that have come from the back benches, please.
Thank you, Councillor Auburn. You've got a note on that.
So just to come in on that, and I think we may have spoken about this outside of the meeting as well, there are a couple of items which have been rolling onto the agenda, but unfortunately there has been quite a lot of items coming through on the agenda plan. So therefore some of the more topic-based items we've not been able to fit into the agenda without, obviously with the volume coming through as well. But if there's any appetite for it, we can obviously try and arrange some of those more information items to be as an online session with some of the external agencies that we've arranged, for example, the Great Fen. We could arrange that for a separate evening as an online information session if that would be of interest to councillors. Perhaps if I send around an email to gauge interest and availability on dates, and we can work from there and see if that works. We can obviously add that in for a couple of the other items as well to then get those things moving along for you if that would be of interest.
Any other questions? Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. I'd just like to reiterate, it would be quite nice to get a meeting of the Climate Working Group organised again. I mentioned it in May, but it seems like perhaps the HVO fuels project is sort of passing. I don't know if that's something that still needs work involved in it.
So the initial pilot of the HVO trial has come to an end, and we'll be bringing an update through to Scrutiny to sort of update on how that's worked and the impacts of that. So I think that's scheduled for September. But again, I think September's a busy meeting, so it might end up being in October, but that will be coming forward.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? So moving on to item 4, the Cambridgeshire County Council Health Committee. They're looking to appoint a non-voting co-opted member and a substitute member to the Cambridgeshire County Council Health Committee. Would anyone like to put their name forward? Is this a daytime?
Yes, this is a daytime meeting, and the previous member and substitute member have been Councillor McAdam and yourself, Councillor Kerr. So would anybody like to volunteer to be the member and substitute member on that? I think Councillor Tevlin.
Councillor Tevlin?
And I'll put myself forward if that is fine.
Councillor McAdam, did you want to still put yourself forward?
No, I don't have as much time available now, so I'm happy to step down from that. Thank you.
Are you?
Anybody else showing any interest? So, Councillor Tevlin, we'll put your name forward, and I'm happy to be your substitute member. Thank you. Moving on to item 5, the Local Authority Housing Fund, round 3. We've got Pam, who's going to give a short presentation. With Councillor Wakeford, yeah.
Thank you. I come to what feels like most of the other scrutiny panel. I don't think I have spoken here for a little while. You've got me by luck. Whether that's good or bad luck, you'll have your view, because this could equally have been me or Councillor Ferguson, because this straddles our areas. So this paper is on, as you indicated, Chair, the Local Authority Housing Fund round that's relevant, round 3. This is essentially seeking appropriate delegations and support so that we can participate in that round to accept funding in order to help us acquire homes under the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme. We would be taking on responsibility for supporting them. And there are different ways we might then discharge that. But also the paper seeks delegations more broadly so that we can act swiftly in similar contexts in future. We would still use that transparently, but to avoid us needing technically to make a new cabinet decision as timescales can be tight for agreeing receipt of government funds, so that we're in the strongest possible position to accept money to support building of affordable housing and such like from government agencies. DLUC is referenced in the paper, but of course DLUC's name has changed since we went to press. Pam, I think, is able to take us through in a little more detail some of the background and specifics, but we're then happy to take comments and questions.
Thank you, Councillor Wakeford. Good evening, everyone. So as the report goes into a bit of detail, we have been currently operating Local Authority Housing Fund round 1, which was for a total of 21 units for Ukrainian and Afghan families. We've been working with Stonewater Housing Association, who have been acquiring the properties, and we've been working in partnership with them to achieve that. We've currently sourced 16 properties where people have currently occupied those homes. We've got another 4 progressing, and we've still got the 1 remaining unit that we're trying to source before the deadline of that round. This paper particularly gives a little bit of background about how that has actually operated, but I'll focus in on the round 3 for which we're reporting on this evening, which is slightly different to round 1 in that this is based, as Councillor Wakeford said, around the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme, and it's actually a much smaller round. We're only looking at 4 units in total for this round, and different again to the first round, which is that we are looking to achieve 1 temporary accommodation unit and 3 permanent units, and that's what we've been asked by government to source if we want to take part. So in relation to this round, we obviously have spoken to Stonewater, as to whether they would be interested in running this scheme with us as well, and they're currently seeking board approval for that. Unfortunately, we haven't had an outcome of that prior to this meeting, but and part of the reason why we've taken the paper today is so that we've written it in such a way that if that board approval is received and if we are supporting this, then we can move quite swiftly after that. If Stonewater aren't interested in working with us for the for the 4 units as part of the round 2 funding, then we have other options. We can go to other registered providers in the district to see if they may be interested in working with us. And also because, importantly, this round includes the requirement to provide a temporary accommodation unit. Stonewater don't hold any temporary accommodation in the district, so we've gone to one of our suppliers of temporary accommodation, which is the Home Group. Home have also expressed interest in working with us on the temporary accommodation unit and have also expressed interest on the 3 other units. So we've already, in theory, got an association that may also be interested in working with us on the 3 other units as well. The report goes on to talk about the sort of the mechanics of how that would operate, and the government set down the criteria on how much grant we are going to be given, and that's based on the median property values in the district, so that's sort of a non-negotiable figure that they've worked out how much we're entitled to support the acquisition. Importantly, that figure isn't for the entire purchase of the unit. As you can probably recognise, 614,000 isn't going to acquire 4 units in Huntingdonshire. It's for the larger unit, the 1 4-bedroom plus that we would be required to acquire. We can use 50% of the value as grant, and the remaining 3 units would be 40%. That's similar to the current scheme that we've been operating with Stonewater. The one distinction that this round 3 varies from the current project that we're doing is that at the moment Peterborough City Council have been supporting our Afghan families in the accommodation that we found with Stonewater, but they have basically advised us that they wouldn't be able to continue to support any more families. They're basically at their maximum capacity. So officers have already spoken to neighbouring authority that's expressed an interest in being able to do that, who's also participating in the scheme. But also aligned to that, our own community development team have expressed an interest in actually working with the families and supporting them. And it basically picks up the types of work they're already doing within the community. So that's added to the recommendation that we would seek in the first instance our own council team to support these 4 residents, 4 households. But if that wasn't to succeed for any reason, then we have got the option of looking at a neighbouring authority. I'm happy to leave it there. I'm conscious there may be questions, so happy to field any queries that you do have on the report.
So if I may briefly chair, then I suppose there are 2 separate questions. One is, does the committee endorse the idea of us proceeding at all with round 3? And then secondarily, any sort of comments and questions around the mechanics of how we do that?
Have we got any questions or comments on Councillor Shaw?
Thank you. I think it's quite an admirable scheme. I do have concerns regarding this sort of ongoing funding of the residents or the people that will be occupying these premises. Have we consulted with the volunteer groups that essentially we're planning on, not dumping's the wrong word, but who we're planning on supporting these residents if they have capacity to support them going forward?
So Claudia Death has been working with me on this project and has confirmed that she has made those approaches to the organisations that she would hope to be able to partner up with to provide the support, and they have capacity. I think that the type of support isn't necessarily on a daily basis. It's more about getting children into schools, helping with work and employment, those sorts of things, which are sort of, it's just more of like a neighbourly support type approach rather than intensive.
Councillor Alban, then Councillor Tevlin.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I've been away for work, so I haven't quite as given the papers as much scrutiny as I'd like to, so sorry if this is covered. Could you explain the difference between temporary and permanent accommodation? Is it the buildings are temporary structures, or if you could give a better background on that, where does the funding come from the balance that we aren't given by a grant? And the two housing associations you've mentioned, I've not heard of those before. They're not one of the regular ones I've come across in my ward, and I'd just be grateful a bit of background about their experience. You covered some of it with one of them, but a bit more information would be really helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
So the temporary is temporary housing, temporary accommodation. So there's a recognition that local authorities need support in actually giving more capacity to their temporary accommodation provision. So it's not temporary housing. The three other units would be in perpetuity permanent housing for those families that are occupying it, like any other housing association let that we would do through, obviously traditionally through a choice-based letting system. So they would have a permanent tenancy granted, whereas the other unit is for temporary accommodation. So there could be movement through that unit into more permanent accommodation. The funding balance comes from the housing association. So they would work on their rental return to give them the financial ability to acquire the unit. So the 60% that they're not getting in grant, they would use with their own financial ability, basically, on their rental return. And so Home are an established organisation. They're one of two housing associations that we use for temporary accommodation provision and are well known to John Collins' team in housing needs and homelessness. And John Collins personally suggested we approached Home in the first instance because he thought that it would match some of their sort of new business generation at the moment. Stonewater are doing other sites across the district. They are a registered provider of social housing. They operate maybe more in neighbouring authorities, and so maybe are not as common a name to yourselves, but they are establishing a reasonable stock in the district now. So they're building out other sites across the district. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Just a follow-up, just a clarification. So other than the officer time, the funding is part coming from the grant, part coming from the housing association. So our exposure financially stops at the officer time in involvement. Thank you very much.
Councillor Tevlin.
Thank you. I've had the experience of working for other authorities in Cambridgeshire with regards to the schemes, particularly the ACRS scheme, and I commend how important it is. I know that in Huntingdonshire there was a contract which in Brampton that actually went to another authority. So I again would commend that it would be very useful to Huntingdonshire to actually be able to house those under the ACRS scheme. We've seen as well with the Dolphin Hotel in St Ives and the impact on the bridging hotels that their accommodation is no longer. So again, it is important that we do provide this sort of accommodation. I just wonder, is there any possibility of getting any funding from the Home Office? Has that been looked at for this under the scheme towards HTC and this? Thank you.
So I'll turn to Pam on the details as ever, but to reassure, absolutely, as an administration, we're entirely supportive of the ACRE scheme, which is why we're supporting it already with the round one. And round three is a relatively small addition to that, but we are certainly, I would urge and invite support, because we certainly do wish to progress for exactly the reasons Councillor Teflin describes. So we very much have been participating in Huntingdonshire. It is correct that a neighbouring authority participating as well has acquired some property in our district as well as its own, as its way of discharging that. But that's additional rather than instead of us having done that, just for avoidance of doubt. I think what's set out here is funded. So, you know, I'd never turn down additional money from the Home Office, but I don't think there's a specific funded need that we'd have to go to them for. But Pam, was there anything you wish to add?
Just a slight thing that I do know that the council has been successful in getting Home Office funding for the support that we as a council have been giving. So I would imagine, it's obviously not my area of expertise, but I would imagine that would be continuing, and that would be some of the funding that the officers were thinking of in relation to trying to help support these clients.
Thank you, Pam. That makes sense. Councillor McAdam.
Thank you, Chair. Bit of a basic question, really. I take it that we are looking at accommodation which already exists. We're not talking about building new houses for this. Would I be right in saying that we're seeking already existing accommodation?
Yes. So all the properties, when we set up the original scheme with Stonewater, we made some decisions that to be of a good quality for the new residents moving in, that we would either look at properties that were close to completion, so already being built, or properties that were less than 10 years old. So that was a decision that was taken from the beginning. Unlike the first round, which had quite close and tight timescales to actually find and source the units, this does actually have a 2-year programme, albeit we are already in year 1 and we're eking along quite quickly. So it is removing quite a lot of time. But I would imagine this would be existing supply, very similar to the first round, which would be under 10 years of age.
Councillor Shaw and then Councillor Mockball.
Thank you. It mentions about in round 1 we supported it with £7,500 per home of the affordable housing commuted sum money. Is that going to be the case for round 3 as well?
We haven't got into that detail yet well, it would very much depend on our provider. So if it was Stonewater, they may well ask the council if we're able to support with additional commuted sum payments. And obviously that is something that I could consider because obviously it is generating new affordable homes in the district, which is the purpose of commuted sums in lieu of direct provision. But I think it very much would depend on the financial position of whoever we work with as to how it actually sort of stacks up financially, viability-wise. It is an option, definitely.
Councillor Mockball.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question's already covered, but I'll just like to make a comment that I really enjoyed reading the report, and I really hope that these people get the safety and the security and the support that they can get finally in HCC.
Yes, it seems like a no cost to us, but a lot of benefit. Any other comments or questions on this paper? In that case, thank you very much for your presentation and answering the questions. Thank you, Pam. So moving on to agenda item number 6, civil parking enforcement in Huntingdonshire. We're going to receive an update on the civil parking from George and Councillor Taylor.
Is it okay, Chair, to start? Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thank you, members. Let me put my goggles on. Hang on. Okay. So the activity to deliver civil parking in Huntingdonshire began under the previous administration. It was supported at ONS in 2021. That seems ages ago, but after that, it was then endorsed by the Cabinet at the time. As you know, I've spoken about previously at this panel that I totally remain committed to the delivery of CPE. As you know, I think it's going to have many benefits for our residents. This year, a couple of reports have been brought to the panel. The previous report was commercially sensitive. It contained information, unfortunately, that wasn't being able to put into the public domain, so it was held in private session. We're taking tonight the opportunity to provide an update so others, as well as yourselves, may see the scope of the works undertaken and obviously the progress that has been made towards the delivery of civil parking enforcement in our area. As we continue the journey, we have other works still in the pipeline. One of these items is the communication, which is really, really important as part of the CPE. So what tonight we're going to look at, and I look forward to discussing this evening, is around the opportunity for a working group session. It will be a one-off, it won't be a continuous, so there won't be sort of like, you won't have to commit too much to it. But it's to enable councillors to involve in steering what we're going to do with the communication part of it, but we'll discuss that later. But George will give you the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. So as Councillor Taylor has just alluded to, this is obviously a presentation. The previous paper was part 2, so this is just to update in a more public setting the works that have been done and be proud of the works that we have done and the way progress we're making. So a quick recap on what civil parking enforcement is. Civil parking enforcement is a process, and it's a process that changes on-street criminal parking enforcement activity into a decriminalised civil matter where it can be enforced by a local authority. Across the UK, there's 327 local authority areas, which actually includes TfL as well. And of these, you have got 322 that have already committed to CPE. As you can see, the outlying areas, South Cams have gone live since the update of this map, but there is a focus in Cambridgeshire in the rural areas. And this is a process that we are undertaking with the support of Cambridgeshire County Council. The process will see the Highways Authority, so Cambs County Council, make an application to the DFT, so the Department for Transport, to establish a civil enforcement area and a special enforcement area. Once the application has been reviewed by the DFT, it'll be laid before Parliament to approve and enable the enforcement to take place. So talking a little bit how we got here. So ordinarily the process of decriminalising parking and the subsequent enforcement is owned by the County Council or the Highways Authority. There's currently 5 left to pursue, 3 are in Cambridgeshire. Previous independent assessments concluded that while CPE could be adopted in Huntingdonshire, its ongoing operation was not financially viable, therefore its adoption was not on the agenda of the County Council. Back in 2021, a paper was brought before ONS and Cabinet, which gave approval to pursue CPE in Huntingdonshire. It'd see the operation undertaken by ourselves as the District Council, and part of the decision was a budget provision made in line with the independent assessment. So that's an MTFS impact of about 60k per annum for the ongoing loss in operational revenue from the change. Later in 2021, a paper was taken to Cambs County Council's Highways and Transport Committee expressing our wish to pursue. It was agreed that County would support the process, leaving Huntingdonshire established as a civil enforcement area and special enforcement area. So there's a slight difference on the two of those. It just allows a catalogue of offences. So civil enforcement is most of your double yellow lines. Special enforcement area is the drop curb offences as well. Sorry, I've just had the restart icon on my laptop. So where are we now? So we've undertaken So where we are now, we've undertaken works to form an agency agreement with Cambridge County Council. So the agency agreement was actually part of the paper brought last time to this panel in April, and the council has, HDC, now sealed and signed this agreement. The agreement is now with County Council for signing and sealing, and it will be back with us shortly. We've undertaken a traffic regulation order review, so that has involved mapping every inch of restrictions within the district boundaries to understand exactly where there's a double yellow line, where there's a loading bay, taxi bay. We now know where every single one of those is. We've done the remedial design work package. There's an example of the slide in the bottom right-hand corner. And this is a series of tiles. There's about 3,000 in total of these. And what they do is say, in this area, there is a piece of line, this many meters from this corner to this corner needs relining. So it's a very foolproof package for remedial works. We're still in the process of waiting for the Department of Transport application to be complete. It's currently with CCC, and it is ready for submission to the DFT once the DFT have released tranche dates. So the Department for Transport have already done a pre-submission check, so they're quite happy with the content of the document. However, due to the election call, the DFT haven't announced any tranche dates just yet because they have to have a parliamentary date in place. Another piece of work we've done is we've undertaken the process to register ourselves with the Traffic Penalty Tribunal, or Patrol is the public-facing side of it. And this will replace the use of the Magistrates' Court for escalation of parking fines. So what happens next? Well, we've still got quite a bit of work to do. So currently we are in the process of looking at back office enforcement systems and how we will make sure that the system works with the new legislation. As I say, most authorities have done this, so it is fairly easy for finding a supplier that's doing it. We just want to make sure that the supplier and the actual way it works for the public, if they were submitting an appeal, is a nice, simple process. We are in the process of undertaking the procurement works for the remedial works, which was discussed last time. We are still in this process, so we can't discuss this in too much detail at the moment. We are looking at the service transition as well. Parking will need to operate as is currently until the point that we undertake the on-street enforcement. So we are still having to administer our own car parks, and we have a transition plan in place for how we do this and the switchover point for our staff. There was a change in staff. There'll be a position on uniform that needs to be adopted by the council. So later this year, we will be having some papers coming forward that just confirms our position on uniform and localised application of restrictions and how we'll prioritise enforcement with available resource. The next exciting part is the stakeholder update sessions. So these are sessions to explain what civil parking enforcement is, with it impacting all wards within the district. We have presentations scheduled in with the four main town councils in the area, St Neots and Ives, Huntingdon and Ramsey Town Council on the 23rd and 22nd of this month. They are coming in for a session. And then we have an open day that's been extended to all parishes on the 31st and the 8th of August. And that's been extended to all parish councils to send representatives along to in the Civic Suite here. And also to all HDC elected members as well, for members to come have a presentation that goes into a bit more detail about the types of offences that we'll be enforcing under CPE and an opportunity to ask questions. And again, comms is something that we've been working on. We've been working on with our communication team to develop a communication plan. The plan is to ensure that all persons travelling into the district are aware of the change to CPE. We'll be further developing this plan and we'll be rolling out measures at the appropriate times. So what does the change mean to us? Well, CPE changes the legislation that we operate car parks under. Our car parks are currently operated under the Road Traffic Regulations Act 1984. This will be a change to the Traffic Management Act 2004. The big changes for us are parking offences become a civil matter. They're no longer criminal, which means we can enforce them in place of the police. We will no longer use a magistrate's court. We will use an independent adjudicator. We'll use in civil enforcement officers across both our on-street, off-street car parks and on-street. And we'll also be responsible for some of the on-street administrative functions as well. The police will still retain powers for enforcement for dangerous and obstructive parking, moving traffic offences and vehicles parked on pedestrian crossings and zigzags. So during this process, we are establishing a civil enforcement area. County Council are in the process as well of using those powers to look at what can be done for bus lane enforcement within the district. As a quick summary of the agency agreement we discussed last time, the core functions are car park enforcement will remain with HDC as are our sites. On-street enforcement will go ahead and come to HDC apart from the couple of parts associated with the police. Notice processing, so that's your parking fine appeals and your prosecutions afterwards, will remain with the district council along with parking permits for both on and off streets. And we'll also be taking the suspension of restrictions. So if you apply for works in the area and you want to suspend parking bays, that's a function that we'll be undertaking as well, because there is an associated administrative fee we can collect for doing those works. County Council will retain highways maintenance. They will retain the responsibility for new permit schemes and also for new highways restrictions in the area. We're not assuming those for highways functions. So the stakeholder update sessions, so I've spoken about these briefly already. This is the first step. We are excited about these. So 30th of July, I did get the date wrong, and 8th of August, we have the member and parish sessions taking place here. They start at, I believe, 12 o'clock, and every 2 hours we are doing a constant presentation with an opportunity for questions. We have also had the town councils invited to presentations as well, and all 4 town councils have confirmed for that. So we look forward to these as well. Just to keep on track that we are obviously managing the risks of the project. We have a full risk register for how we are doing things, and this is just a snapshot. We do have a risk management process in place. There are risks associated with this process, namely we have delays possible due to parliamentary delays that may occur. However, we are working with officers jointly at county to ensure we stay on top of this and keep on track and know where we are at. Coming on to Councillor Taylor's section as well, a working group session. So communication is a key part of our prep work for CPE. So we need to ensure that everyone that travels in the district on our highways knows about this change. It will impact anyone using a highway. So everyone has to have the best chance to observe messaging. We'd like to get our councillors involved and look at how the ideas that we've come up with so far, whether there's anything we've missed, any suggestions that members have, and it would be a great opportunity to engage in a cross-party working group session and to review ideas and to see what other suggestions could be used to spread the word. We are looking at this as a co-design opportunity to take advantage of yourselves. So I'm going to pause on this one a second while we discuss this. So first off, if anyone would like to get involved, that would be absolutely fantastic. We are looking for a representation from across the district. We're looking for around 5 to 10 members, ideally, making up different areas from within the district, a mix of rural main towns, to talk about how messaging could be tailored to ensure we get it to the right people. And it'd be great to see who would be wanting to get involved in this.
Are they daytime or evening sessions? This meeting?
We would be organising a daytime session. The sessions would be organised. We do it over Teams, as we've done with some similar working groups, such as the EV ones, but it would be a daytime session.
Brilliant. I'd like to put my name forward. Is anyone else happy? Oh, we've got a load of hands. Would you like the list? If you put your hand up, I just want to clarify, because you put your hand up, it doesn't mean you'll be in the group, because they do need a cross section of areas, but the more people that volunteer, the better. Do you want to capture the names? Yeah.
Let's put their hand up.
And my hand's up too.
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you, George.
Thank you very much. So the main dates we're still working to with CPE are, we are still working towards the 3rd of February for the warning notice period to commence. And then we're working for a 4-week warning notice period with enforcement to commence on the 3rd of March. So the application has set out the DFT draft application that these are the dates. The DFT's pre-submission check undertaken are aware of our target dates as well. And obviously we're working towards these dates. Should there be any change, we will obviously advise members, but this is the dates we are working to. And that is the end. So thank you very much. I'll take any questions you've got.
So I'll start with Councillor Criswell.
Yes, thank you very much. Perhaps I should declare an interest as a member of Cambridgeshire County Council before I start. Thank you. Yes, I'm pleased to see that highway maintenance is staying responsibility of the County Council. Do I assume we've got a commitment that all signs and lines will be updated by the time this is due to be introduced in March? And is there a commitment for those signs and lines to be maintained in the future? Because obviously civil parking enforcement is totally reliant on those being up to date and in good order. Thank you.
Yes, so we have a remedial works package, so the parcel of signs and lines which we're currently looking to procure at the minute. The total is around 80 kilometres of lining that needs to be redone, but that will bring it up to scratch for enforcement purposes, and it will be done by the point that we go live with civil enforcement. As part of this as well, we'll be making corrective measures to the signage in place. There's signs currently in place that are no longer needed or no longer compliant, and there are signs that aren't in place that are needed. So all of this work will be undertaken. The County Council are aware of the requirement for signs and lines to be maintained once CPE is implemented. We will have a process to report any faults that are impacting us. The County Council will work within budget, so they will still have to prioritise safety. However, they also are aware of the pressures it will put on enforcement as well.
Just to follow up, if I may. So are the County Council paying for that initial work, or is the District Council paying for some of that?
The initial piece of work is actually being funded, the majority of which is being funded by the District Council. There is a part contribution by Cambridge County Council equal to the contribution that they've made towards the setup of South Cams, and the offer has been extended to Fenland and East Cams should they go live at some point as well. But yes, the majority of the funding to recap on the remedial works and bring it up to standard is being done by the district.
Thank you. So just to follow up, to say that County Council is totally responsible for highway maintenance is slightly misleading, because there will be an initial section where they're not, because we will be. So
yes, so the County Council will retain responsibility under civil parking enforcement for the ongoing highway maintenance functions. During the initial section, it was in the agency agreement paper last time. We are, because it was the HDC pursuit of it and not a County Council pursuit, we are funding that initial piece of work. However, we aren't taking on any ongoing responsibility for the maintenance.
sorry, me again. So it would be good to know how much that bringing up to scratch is going to cost, if we've got, you know, that's going to be funded. So I think Scrutiny needs to know how much that's going to
Councillor
cost.
Taylor can answer that.
Yeah, as I alluded to earlier, the last session, you may not have been here, this is why you've probably missed it. So our last session with this panel was in private, and it was all about the costs of the remedial work. It may be good for you to revisit that on the extranet and have a look at that. But all the costs are in there. Unfortunately, we can't talk about it tonight because we're in public session, and these are going out to tender at the moment. So,
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Bywater.
Yeah, you've answered my question, Chair, really, in relation to the... I am a county councillor, by the way, as well, but I should mention that. You've answered my concerns in relation to the future maintenance, because as I'm sure you all know, members, you know, yellow lines don't seem to last like they used to last, really, because of the water-based paints as opposed to the cellulose stuff that they used to use. So that will be something. I guess is there a risk that when we're maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, when lines are starting to wear out and county council maybe not as quick as we want to reinstate those lines, is there a contingency for disputes if we say they need repainting and they say, well, actually we can't do it?
So there would be a mechanism of raising the concerns to county council. We are only entering into the agency agreement for a 5-year term with county, so we are only taking on the enforcement for a 5-year period. During that 4th year, we will be able to, after the anniversary of the 4th year, and in the 4th year, we'll be able to look back on the performance, so things like how well county have been maintaining, and that will inform our decision on whether we extend the contract after the 5-year term or hand back the responsibility for enforcement to the county council. So we do have a mechanism to report. We have to understand that county council are going to prioritise how they spend their budget, and whilst we can influence that, they will have to put safety concerns first. We can reflect on the process and the impact it's had on ourselves when we make that decision to extend the contract.
And just a comment, really, George. I know you've worked and the team have worked really hard. So just thank you very much, because I'm looking forward to this coming, really, because as I'm sure we all are. Really, it's taken a while, but I understand the reasons behind that. But I know you've put a lot of time and effort. So thank you very much.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, just to continue on the line of, excuse me, once, if we don't carry on the enforcement after the 5 years, it doesn't mean to say that CPE is finished, because once it's in legislation, and it will have to be enforced some other means. Whether it's us or not, it is, is the question.
So in effect, we could just pass it back to county council. It becomes their responsibility then, pretty much, is how I read it. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, Councillor Orban.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 or 3. I think Councillor Bywater mentioned about zigzags, and just on the clarity, I work with Simon quite effectively on county issues in the area where we overlap each other, and one is Church Street in Stilton, and I've just finished 9 years as a district councillor, and I've been working now. I think Simon and I are on our 3rd go to get the zigzags repainted outside of Stilton School. So when you refer to policing of the zigzags, just to clarify, under CPE we would do the yellow zigzags outside schools, for example, but we wouldn't police police is probably the wrong word. We wouldn't enforce the white zigzags by a pedestrian crossing. Is that correct?
Just let me double check quickly. So yes, we will be able to enforce some of the zigzags. It depends exactly on how County Council have put the TRO in behind that and how they've recorded it on the TRO. We'd hope that they've made it so that we can enforce zigzags leading up to the crossings. Parking on a crossing itself would be a police matter as an obstructive and dangerous piece of parking. But yes, we'd be able to, the yellow zigzag coming up to a school, the school keep clears, we would be able to enforce those.
Thank you. That's useful. On that, when this came before years ago, when it first came before scrutiny, I was chairing the panel, and I remember we got a list of areas, street by street, ward by ward. I think members representing rural divisions where there are little villages we don't go to as often as the bigger villages, and the councillors representing towns probably see streets more regularly than we do. Could you remind us all where we can find those streets in our ward, and that we can pass on those information to parishes in case there's sort of little streets tucked away with yellow lines that aren't so obvious as the ones on the main drag, please?
So the digitisation piece of work is a piece of work we've undertaken as part of the prep work. That digital TRO is going to be given to County Council anyway, that information. There is a piece of central government work going on as well, where all parking will become digital. So County are in the process of making sure those TROs over the next year or so are all digitally made available for the whole county. It's a larger piece of work driven by central government around automation. So I can't confirm exactly where you'll be able to see where the double yellow lines are exactly, because the portal's not up yet, but there will be a piece of information available on the County Council Highways website or linked out of it.
But before we get to that stage, there was documentation that came through scrutiny before that listed it ward by ward, street by street. It'd be useful if someone could find out and let us all know where that document is. It'll be somewhere in the council ether somewhere.
Sorry, yes. So one of the papers we'll be bringing through later this year is how we look at localised priorities and prioritisation of enforcement. So whilst we had a street by street in the past where that was to inform the business case and the approximate number of staffing we'd need, we will be bringing back another paper that says with the resource available, this is going to be our enforcement plan and the allocation of resource in the district. So there was a draft idea which was part of the original business case to inform the funding. We will be bringing a proposal on how that is allocated out back later this year. So there was a provisional plan in the past, but there will be a plan being brought forward later this year.
Just Councillor Tay, I think she wants to come in before you carry on.
Thank you. No, I was just about to say on the back of that one, you know, it's good for yourselves to know as members where your hotspots are. So you can then sort of say, you know, in your positions, like, well, you know, and your residents saying to you, this is becoming a problem, this is, you know, a real hassle. And then hopefully that can be looked at and the enforcement officers can go and look at those hotspots, I'm hoping.
Councillor Orban.
Thank you, Chair. Just one more question and then a comment. I think it's that's a real key thing. I think part of you've touched on communication, and I think what has been put forward. Well, here's a question. I think what's been put forward now probably looks thorough and better planned out than it did had we gone live when we originally intended to. And as much as I'm disappointed with the delay, to me it seems like what we've got now is better than what we would have got a couple of years ago. Would you say that's fair?
I think the difference is because we were working towards timescales, there's a certain amount of work that we can't progress until we have certain decisions in place. So in the past, we slowed progression because we weren't reaching an agreement with around the agency agreement a year or two ago. So we paused other pieces of work in the background until we could see that developing. Once we addressed the resourcing issues with partners, for example, and they were able to progress with us on the agency agreement development, we allocated more resource back into this again to make progress. It's not that we couldn't have made the progress at that time. It would have been resource would have allocated to a piece of work when the underpinning piece of the agency agreement wouldn't have been in place at the time. So we've just managed our timeline differently, is that all I can say.
Thanks. And finally, Chair, my thanks on behalf of the residents of my ward. That I was staggered about the amount of detail it takes to plot lines in, and then to think beyond my ward and the villages that I represent to how that stretches out across the district. And I'm keen with other members to play my part to make this work, and particularly as well on the time management. I won't ask a question on that because you've already covered it. I'm happy that every area will get its fair and appropriate share according to need and according to problem. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that with the delays, the last delay was due to, as you know, the parliamentary sort of time. Had that not happened, we still would have, you know, been looking to implement it at that time. So, it's just given us, I guess, a little bit more breathing space to make sure that we're getting that communication to you as members, to our towns and parishes, and we're not rushing things. We've got the time to do things, and I am so looking forward, fingers crossed, that it goes through Parliament. I am so looking forward to next February/March.
Has anyone got any other questions or comments to make? Councillor Shaw.
It's just to follow up on Councillor Orban's request regarding knowing the information in our wards. As far as I'm aware, when the TROs are in their sort of consultation period, all the documents are uploaded. You can download all of those, presumably all of your signs and lines information at that point, would be my guess. I don't know if you can clarify that.
So to make it easier for CPE, there's a lot of archived data that County Council hold in regard to TROs. So you would have had older restrictions, and the actual written document may not match what's on the street and been remarked since. So the process we're undertaking at the minute, we are marking it to an agreed standard with County Council. So we've gone through all the lines, said this needs work. What should the restriction be? What should the accompanying sign be? County will then rematch the TRO, the legislative side, back towards what we know is going to be marked, so we have a starting point for CPE that's accurate. So currently there are many TROs, however there will be a updated TRO version from the County Council that reflects the go live point of CPE to give us what we know is then correct going forwards.
Councillor Mutbull.
Thank you, Chair. My question was just regarding like the revenue from the on-street parking. Does that still come to us, or is that going to County Council?
No, so on-street parking pay and display income. So you have revenue from, there's a couple of bays on Huntingdon High Street. There were some previously in St Ives Town Centre and St Neots Market Square. That is County Council highway based, so the income goes back to County Council, but then the income goes back to county, but it is ring fenced for certain matters. So highways improvement, so it goes back into maintaining highways, but it is a County Council income.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Shaw.
Really quick and easy one. So it's on your little list of who's responsible for what. It stated that we would be administering parking permits. Is that something we currently do, or is that a new thing that we'll be doing?
So currently we administer parking permits for our off-street car parks. There are some on-street permit schemes. I think there's 5 in total. There's 1 in Hemmingford, there's 2 in Huntingdon, I think 2 in St Neots as well. The administration of those schemes, county will be passing that administration to us, because then we would hold the live data, know about the permits, who's what, and then we are obviously doing the enforcement as well. There is an administration fee for administering the permits, which would come to us as maintaining that function.
Councillor Motwell, quick one.
Sorry, last one. I just remembered from somewhere else. Business permits, can they be given out to businesses for the car park, the ones that we own?
We currently have some district permits, so we have permits that residents can apply for, or anyone can apply for on our website anyway. We don't have any specific business permits in place at the minute.
Any other questions or comments on this item? In that case, I want to thank you, George and Councillor Taylor, and I can tell you from almost every councillor I speak to and every resident, we cannot wait for this to happen. So moving on to item 7, the local area energy plan. We're going to receive a presentation from Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Or perhaps just
or no, maybe not. She was here.
Thank you for being patient. So Neil and I are here tonight to talk about local area energy planning. And I just wanted to put it in perspective before Neil goes into some details. So we know as a district, as a region, as a nation, we're going to have to be moving towards more things that need more electricity to be run. And if we approach the UK power networks or the grid with lots of small asks about what each district or even which town needs in the next few years, that's much less efficient than if we come together as a region and work out what are we going to need in the decades to come. So the local area energy plan is about Cambridgeshire minus Peterborough, which I'll explain in a minute, coming together and trying to work out what is that need in the decades to come, and putting it together in a comprehensive way that's data-led, that can help design infrastructure in the years to come. So I said minus Peterborough, that's because they already have a local area energy plan. They were one of the very early adopters of this process, and so we can look to them a bit for some lessons learned, and it's the rest of the local authorities of Cambridgeshire that are working on the project that Neil's going to update us on now.
Thank you and good evening, panel. Thank you for the opportunity for us to outline this piece of work and project that's underway. Firstly, I'm going to extend apologies. I'm not Amber Beardshaw. I don't know if you've noticed that. Amber, unfortunately, is not well. So unfortunately or fortunately, I'm here in her place. So This evening, we're just going to go through what a local area energy plan is, just so that you're familiar with that. Some of you may have heard of the term, some of you may not. It's not widely established across the UK, but is becoming more so. So hence, some of you may have heard of it and some of you may not. Why we're involved, how it happens, where we're at in terms of the scheme, and then really any questions. And on the slide deck, there are actually some links to some information to read at your leisure in terms of the plan that Peterborough already has, but also some of the information about how they're put together, just in case you want to reflect on that. So first of all, what is a local area energy plan? So there's a simple definition there. But the really important thing is that lots and lots of councils in the country have declared a climate emergency and have set targets for net zero. Not so many councils have a plan of how they're actually going to achieve net zero. As you know, we have an action plan associated with our climate strategy. And a local area energy plan is a really, really important way of looking at the energy system now, looking into the future at what technology might be with scenario planning, to then see what the energy requirements might be in a locality. And typically that locality, they look at a region because it's more sensible to look at the network at that level than it is to look at it at a district level. Peterborough was slightly different, and that's why they went first, just because, one, they were part of the early tranche that developed how this is done. So what we're presenting to you today is a methodology that Peterborough were in part of developing. And they received full funding for that from UK Innovate, the government arm, to actually develop that. Now that funding isn't available, which is why some areas are developing it and some areas perhaps are a little bit further behind in terms of looking at it at the moment. But it's very much looking at the whole system. And if you think about all the things that contribute to carbon in our district, the things that are excluded from this are commercial transport and I've written a note of the other one and it's escaped me. It's commercial transport and there's an element of industry that's not involved, but typically 70% of the emissions are catered for through the energy system. So that's why it's a really important piece of work. So in terms of the purpose, is to set out the change that's required from where we are now to the system that we'll need in the future. And Councillor Davenport-Ray has already mentioned that transition to electricity. Now, obviously, the source of the electricity is really important because it's got to be decarbonised in the first place for it to be net zero. But actually reducing the use of combustion engines instead and shifting to electricity is beneficial anyway. So it's a staging of that system. And so we are working with UK Power Networks on this. And because UK Power Networks are our provider, they have developed an outreach programme to support the regions which they serve with software and tools to develop a local area energy plan. So instead of it costing north of £250,000 to develop one of these things, we're actually spending collaboratively in partnership £120,000, which is a reasonable investment for a region to develop this kind of a plan. And the other benefit is they have all the scenario planning because they have to think about it because of the business that they're in. So they are busy thinking all the time and looking at the technology and how it's adapting and changing to think about what those electricity requirements are going to be in the future. So that's why it's really important that we're working with them and in partnership with them. And they have actually purchased the software systems that will allow us to map all this information, analyse this information, and then present it geographically. So in the partnership, even though we talk about the districts, it's important to know that we are working with and supported by UK Power Networks in a very big way. There's also a stakeholder element to this. So there's a bit of technical study and scenario planning, but then the really important thing is that there's an element of engagement and talking to people in our district. and that's the businesses and the people that live here, to understand what kind of futures they have in mind and where they're at in terms of their energy and some of the barriers, because that helps then overlay that kind of rate of change and rate of progress. We're obviously taking a photograph now. A local area energy plan is a best guess for the future, and so then they have to be revised as you move forward. And Peterborough have had to make a difficult decision moving forward that some of their targets for net zero were just not affordable because the cost of transition was too great at that current point in time. But you've got to draw the line in the sand to be able to start to manage the process. So there's a technical analysis, which we've talked about in terms of what's there and what should be there. There's a piece of non-technical analysis, which is that kind of thinking about the future and scenarios. There's then a social engagement and process with people, and then that's all brought together to then look at what might be required. So why are we involved? It's really fundamental to what we're about as a council at the moment. So there's a range of documents there, 3, which I can set out. So we've got, firstly, our place strategy. Now, our place strategy is all about a better future for 2050 for our residents. And we have a specific journey within there, which is about environmental innovation. And that imagines us having carbon zero as the norm. So it's a very clear aspiration of everybody that's been involved in Huntingdonshire developing that strategy. We also have our corporate plan, which sets out our aims and ambitions until 2028. And very much that, again, illustrates how we put that vision into practice about creating a better Huntingdonshire and also lowering our emissions. And we have our climate strategy then as the vehicle by which we achieve that. And specifically in our climate strategy, we're looking at the things that we do as a council, but also the things that we're enabling and influencing other people to do. A local area energy plan is a key tool for influencing investment, influencing systemic change in our infrastructure to provide for the future. So it's absolutely pivotal to all of those things and shifting that energy to less use and then use to renewables.
I'll just add one more point here that isn't in one of the documents, and that's actually about our economy. So, if we want to foster inward investment in the economy of Huntingdonshire, we know the businesses of the futures are going to have an expectation of the electricity supply that they're going to need to be able to do the type of business they want in the future. So if we show participation in projects like this, we are creating a more fertile environment for future investment in Huntingdonshire.
So in terms of the benefits, and this is taken from the Energy Systems Catapult, and you'll hear this mentioned a number of times, and you'll even recognise this from their website, because they set it out better than everybody else. Reason for that is they are the organisation that worked with pioneering authorities like Peterborough to create the tools. And so very much the benefits of a LEAP is that Huntingdonshire will be part of the solution. We have a really diverse area in Huntingdonshire. We've got our towns and we've got our rural villages, and we have a lot of agriculture as well. And interestingly, if we think back to some of the waste modelling that's been done and the work that's been done on waste and recycling, we were actually used as a case study in terms of Cambridgeshire by DEFRA. And the reason they did that is because we've got that mix of towns and villages all in one region. So again, it's really quite a rich, fertile ground for Cambridgeshire to look at this, because there's lots of learning for everybody. And that's one of the reasons why UK Power Networks are working with us first, because we're the first one to be using their newly procured IT system that's underlying all this information where all the data is going to be stored. So we're in at the off. The reason why Huntingdonshire wants to be there as well is we've got access to the tool. It's a geographically based tool. We're already discussing with how we link that with our 3CT service, with our own GIS layers, so that then our planners and people that are looking at future developments and opportunities can look at where the local energy needs are for that future, so that if we are looking at developments and changes that are 20 years, 30 years time, all that mapped information and those scenarios are there for people to look at that time. So we're building that capability to look into the future. On that map, just out of interest, the blue areas are where they've baselined energy. The pink areas is where they're working on a plan. And the dark kind of cerise colour are the areas that actually have a plan. And I think that illustrates the emergent nature of the work and how important it is that as Cambridgeshire we're doing this, and also as Huntingdonshire we're involved in this. So we've talked a bit about Peterborough, and they adopted their plan, I think it's back in 2019, so some time ago. And there were some quite significant headlines for theirs. I mean, they were looking at a capital investment in Peterborough of £8.8 billion to change the energy system. And of that, 1.2 billion was needed to change the energy infrastructure for people's homes where they live. So it is significant investment that's staged over a long term. And that's why it's important that Cambridgeshire and all the authorities in Cambridgeshire want to be looking at this. The generation of a LEAP goes through a staged process, and this was developed by the Catapult. And very much it's a step-by-step process. We go round the wheel, starting, ironically with number one, which is the hopes and dreams and what we want to do and ambitions, moving through to that engagement with stakeholder conversations, mapping our area, understanding the options, picking what those future pathways look like, look at what the actions might like, and then that ends up in a plan. And what it does is it creates the platform for investment so that we're able to, in Cambridgeshire, describe what that looks like to government. We're able to describe what that looks like to the providers of the infrastructure. And, Councillor Davenport-Ray has referred to businesses as well. By being organised like this, we will attract these people that are interested in providing that infrastructure early, because they will see the investment that we're looking for in that area. And that's why this project is, heavily funded by the Combined Authority, contributed to significantly by the County Council as well, because they recognise the importance of that supporting growth and the future.
Could you go back one slide and just tell us where in those steps we are right now as Cambridgeshire?
So you'll notice on the diagram, all the steps are connected, which I guess is a cheat, so you don't follow 1 to 7. So where we're at the moment is we've done the preparation in terms of the vision documents, in terms of those elements of work. Some of that is being contracted out by the project team. So the engagement is being contracted out. So the scope of that is being worked through at the moment, and the contract's being let. The mapping is underway. The information, which things like the EPC ratings of households, the energy emissions of businesses, all of that data is all being sucked into that system that we talked about, hosted by UK Power Networks. So that's underway and happening. The scenario planning, interestingly, is slightly different. It's not because UK Power Networks bring that with them. So the benefit of them as a partner is that they've already got that scenario planning on board. They can just run the scenarios based on our data. So that accelerates the progress of this and also makes it a lot cheaper to run. So those are the bits that we're doing at the moment. The consultation will actually happen in the autumn, and it'll be 3 months worth of consultation. But that's later in the slide. And then we'll go back into the identification and the planning stage. And the aim is that this will be developed and the draft will be ready at the end of the spring, going into the summer. So I should imagine that the panel will receive the results of that in the summer, because there'll be an adoption process. Because it covers Cambridgeshire, all the authorities will need to look at it and support it. So, as I've said, it provides opportunities to accelerate. It provides the areas for investment, and it unlocks funding opportunities because people are starting to think differently about energy. We think about the energy mix. So there's experimentation with local heat networks, there's experimentation with local energy. We've heard recently about, whether you agree or disagree, the issue about generation of inland through wind. All of those are part of the energy mix that all need to be connected together to be able to support, the country's needs, but specifically our needs in the future. And then on that slide, we've just said that's the progress that we've run through. So rather than sort of go through that again, that's covered. The interesting thing is that the authorities that are working together do have different end points for net zero. That we have different dates. However, we all need the plan. So it's really important that we set out the plan, and the plan is long-reaching and unlocking. So in terms of progress, like we said, funding. So the funding is set out there so that you can see what the partners are contributing. So the Combined Authority are putting in the lion's share, followed by the County Council. Just to highlight, the Greater Cambridgeshire Partnership actually represents Cambridge City Council and also South Cambs, because they're the donut, if that makes sense. So that's why they're 20,000. And then we've contributed 10,000, which is part of our climate commitment budget to that. East and South Cambridgeshire are involved with officer support, but they have a slightly different level of funding. All I can say is that we want to be there with sharp elbows, with full access to all the tools, that we can integrate that with our planners, the same as the ambition of City and South Cambs, because they have the shared planning service as well. So it's really important that we're recognising that, and we're so close to that conurbation and we can benefit from that growth. It's really important that we have a full seat at the table. So that's why we've contributed. In terms of stakeholder engagement, like I said, that's been procured, as in it started. We're going through the process. The steering group, which consists of all the district councils and UK Power Networks, are also in that as a technical. We, like I said, are looking to launch that in the autumn. So that's well underway. And then, as we've said, there's some data analysis. So initial technical input has happened from district authorities sharing data, and then there's some additional technical analysis to be put in, because then the scenarios can be run on the basis of that once that's all in the model. So that's that. So there's a bit of a roadmap there in terms of the timing. And you can see where we are. We're sort of at 3, and we'll approach into stakeholder engagement. There has been some slippage on that. So what I'm saying now in terms of the stakeholder engagement being in the autumn is where it is. There has been a little bit of slippage, but we're still aiming for a plan in 2025. And that is it. So I'm open to any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
I'll start with Councillor Hunt. Thank you.
Thank you. So I could talk about energy all evening, so I'll come in with one question if the chair will let me in after everyone else has had a chance, and I'll jump back in if that's okay. So I've been looking at Peterborough's plan as kind of a guide to kind of get my head around what this looks like, because I'll confess, work in energy, but local area and energy planning is a bit of a blind spot for me. So Plan in Peterborough talks a lot about kind of locating certain assets in certain locations and certain kind of areas of demand and generation in certain areas. So will the finished document have a status in planning law to help determine decisions on that basis?
It's a very quick answer, which is no. It's a guidance document. It sets out art of the possible. It sets some intentions, but it's an incredibly useful data set and modelling tool for planners, because, and this is what's really exciting and the way that we've looked at it, is that if we combine our GIS and how we look at things, which is when we normally look at new developments and the issues, and typically we look at, roads and highways and those kind of things to unlock growth. Well, actually, to unlock growth now, we need digital connectivity and we need energy, and that energy needs to be electricity, and the demand is much greater than before. And so it's really important that our planners in the future have the ability to consider that very easily at their fingertips. when they're looking at things, and that also our economic development teams are able to take that into account to consider some of the challenges, because you might be close to a source of energy or you might not. So it's a key enabling tool and allows us to look into the future, but it doesn't have a planning status.
First, can I check, has Councillor Hunt declared an interest in this item? Good, okay. We're also, as a council, reviewing our local plan. So at the same time as this leap, as we like to call it, is happening, it's being created as a document that could inform our local plan. So you're talking, where the example of Peterborough, of where are things going to be located? If these two things are happening at the same time, then hopefully they can inform each other and create an even better local plan for Huntingdonshire.
Before Councillor Hunt asks any more questions, has anyone else got any? Councillor Orban.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the Climate Change Working Group will know I circulated a magazine article from the Royal Air Forces Association magazine that covered about some of the work that the MOD are doing, specifically the RAF on other stations. I know we've got at least 3 RAF sites left in Huntingdonshire, with the big estates, some with big buildings that are going to be around for a while. I think that's worth, if it's not already thought of, including in our plan. The other thing was, I remember a few years ago, and I don't know how far it's got, there was an article in the Hunts Post about the community in Little Paxton getting together to look at a mini hydroelectric thing around the old Samuel Jones site. And I think there are, despite the fact that we haven't got big lakes with big descents, there are opportunities for mini hydroelectric stations around Huntingdonshire, even if it's supplying the local, just the local immediate area. And I wondered what work had already been done on those two, please.
So it's interesting you raised the point about the importance of the MOD for us and in our region, and obviously thinking about what their requirements are in the future through into 2050, and how they're going to use their assets and how that's going to change as their energy needs change. I think we've got one which is almost on our doorstep as well, with Hinchinbrook Hospital, and obviously the expansion there and the energy requirements that they will have. We also have conversations with the police in terms of how they're looking at their energy demands changing, how they're looking at rapid charging versus slow charging, because at the moment technology isn't capable of delivering them what they need and they're going to need for it. So it's quite an energy intensive area in that part of Huntingdon, for example. So yes, those are in the scenarios and will be worked through. And as they come forward with schemes, the benefit of having this piece of work is that you've got a baseline of what's now and what's needed in the future, and that degree of investment nationally, which means then we can talk to government, have different conversations, enable the combined authority to draw that funding down and say, right, we're ready for this, we need this, but this is the enabler thing. And so then that package with UK Power Networks can be brokered. So that it's really important that we're forward thinking about those kinds of things. Little Paxton and the hydro schemes at a slightly different end of the scale, I would say, in terms of community energy, and it's very localized. It's not going to generate a surplus or anything like that. And so, yes, we're actively engaged in that scheme, not least of which because the site which they're looking to host it on is actually a council-owned site. And so we're working with them in terms of what the lease requirements might be for the land, and they have been working with the Environment Agency and specialist consultants to bring that scheme forward. So it's still progressing. There's still a way to go. They were developing funding packages, and they need to look at planning permission and things like that at the moment. So they have an ambition that it might be the first of many in that kind of scenario. But it's at that embryonic stage where they're looking at kind of the funding package and the planning at the moment. And as I said, we're actually the landlord of where they need to put some of the equipment. So we're having to work through that as well. And there are some complications because it involves the riverbank and changes, and it's actually part of a nature area under higher level stewardship at the moment. So we're just working through some of those challenges with them at the moment. But yeah, it's being worked on.
Councillor Shaw?
Thank you. Really basic, stupid question. Stakeholder engagement procurement is a lovely sounding sentence. So is that the process of tendering for the actual plan to be produced by a third party? Or have I got the wrong end of the stick?
So this is a project with funding that has got different components within it. There is a project team which are hosted at the County Council, which are funded in part by the funding. The actual engagement piece is being outsourced. So we're going to use a third party to do that consultation. So the procurement is for the third party that will undertake that consultation, and that consultation will be run across the whole of Cambridgeshire. And that's part of the reason for getting a third party to do it, because obviously we've all got little bits of how we would do consultation. So because it's a broad project, everybody's contributed to that. So that we'll get one consultation exercise done by a third party that will then inform the process.
Before I bring Councillor Hunt in, any other questions? Councillor Shaw again?
Sorry, because you tagged it on the end of that one. Will this be considering, say, community heating systems? Obviously, we've got a lot of development going on in this area at the minute, and I think rather than investing money in individual homes, individual heating systems, which is far less efficient, have we considered community heating systems at all, similar as they do in Europe?
About a month and a bit ago, I had a pleasure in reading an awful lot of things about community heating systems and their applicability in the country, and it's very emergent in the UK. And actually, mostly they've been applied to areas where you've already got blocks of flats, almost as a retrofit rather than a new fit. And that tends to be the situation at the moment, and the government are actually looking at what that is and how that contributes to the energy mix. Yes, it will be a scenario within the plan because obviously they can contribute, but this is focused on decarbonising the system as well, and some of those energy systems are not decarbonised. So I think there'll be some scenario planning, but yeah, it's a possibility. But when we look forward to things like big ground source heat systems being put into developments, conversations are starting to happen about that, but there are a number of complications to work through at the moment, which is who ends up responsible for it, who pays for it, how do you charge for it, how do you maintain the land, those kinds of things, and they're still being worked through, I think, generally in the UK at the moment. So it will definitely come, and it'll be part of the scenario planning. Will it be a quick fix in Huntingdonshire as a result of this work? No, because this is a forward-looking piece of work.
Did Councillor Hunt want to come back in?
Yes, please. I said I could talk about energy all evening. I'm not going to put you all through that. Sorry. So there's a huge amount of, when this plan is in place, it's going to be a lot about influencing stakeholders. Like, to pull a stat from the Peterborough one, currently about 8 or 9% of their electricity is locally generated. That needs to go up to 88 in their plans. I don't know what the numbers currently are for Hunts, but I can guarantee you that number will need to go up no matter what plan we produce. Unless we're talking about becoming an electricity generation company, which I think there is no appetite for, it's how are we going to influence stakeholders and investors to actually come and build what we need in this plan?
This is closely linked to national planning policy. And I don't think you would be surprised to know that we will likely have a reconsultation on the national NPPF probably sometime soon. And so in some ways, we're going to have to wait for national policy to give us the tools that our planners can use to implement some of that work, or require some of that energy generation, as you said, here in Huntingdonshire on things that are being built.
Just an interesting fact is that when we were doing the climate strategy, we did actually look at energy generation in Huntingdonshire and energy use in Huntingdonshire. And actually, it's about even. It's just that the energy that is produced in Huntingdonshire goes elsewhere. So, and the energy that's used, depending on where you purchase it. But actually, because of the nature of our districts, there was actually a degree of equity, which is interesting. But obviously, it's different people using different energy from different sources.
Cool, thank you. I will probably not subject you all to this, but ask the kind of open-ended question: is there a chance for members with an interest in this area to engage going forward?
I think we would love you to be our consultation champion.
I think I would like to nominate Councillor Hunt as our consultation champion. Anyone else got any other comments or questions in this area? In that case, thank you, Neil and Councillor Davenport-Ray. We will look forward to updates. So moving on to item number 8, garden waste subscription service update. We'll get an update from Councillor Taylor and looks like Oliver.
Shall I start?
Thank you.
Do you want me to? Shall I go for it? Yeah, you can. Well, I'll introduce then. Is that okay, Chair? Shall I go for it? Okay. The report, you will have seen it anyway. It's a good opportunity for the panel to scrutinise the delivery and obviously note the outcome of the introduction of the garden waste subscription service. In the report, you'll see there's much data that has been collected through the process and it will continue to be captured as we progress the service into business as usual. There is one part of the report that I'd like to just touch on, which is one element of the community initiative. So one area in the report is the data on the uptake of the parishes that can request up to 10 community bins. Basically, they'll put it into a community location for residents to use. There are 45 parishes that are permitted to use this initiative. And you will see in the report that only 7 have taken it up. So I would like to take this opportunity to ask members that support the rural areas to talk with the parish councils, if they can, to see if this is something that they would like to provide for their communities. Because I think, you know, you don't have to have the 10 bins if you've only got space for 2 or 1 or 3. Just go for that. It's all you've got to do is have somewhere to subscribe to have an address for them to be picked up, and the crew can pick them up. I just think it's a really good opportunity for people that are less able to afford the subscription to be able to use these bins. Also, I was glad to see the feedback from residents to the collection crews. That they've been receiving positive remarks. And healthy supplies of cakes. I'm not sure if the word healthy is a choice word, but so yeah, they've been getting cakes and drinks from residents to show their appreciation. So that's really, really good. And for residents to do that is absolutely amazing. I've also heard that the crews have been helping residents to understand the new process. I think we've got to realise that the crews are the front line. They're the front facing with our residents, and I think that relationship is really important. Thank you, Oliver.
Good evening, members. You'll note that I'm not Andy Rogan, but Andy's got the evening off, so I'm here to present to you this evening. Clearly, this is one of the most significant changes we've made to kind of frontline service delivery in some time, with significant community interest, and for that reason, we were at great pains, given the great deal of kind of involvement Scrutiny has had in the design of this scheme to come back at the earliest opportunity and be really open and transparent about the impacts of its introduction and how that is going so far. So this is very much a open and transparent presentation of warts and all, how it's gone so far. So I think that the key headline in terms of the introduction to the scheme has been how strong the take-up has been across the service. So the latest figures we have show that 42,624 households have so far taken advantage of the garden subscription scheme. And I think one of the other sort of key aspects and something that we talked about at length as we developed this scheme was the early bird application process, which kicked off late November, early December and ran through to January, which did a number of things. It gave people the chance to lock in the early bird discount rates. But critically, in terms of the success of the overall sort of rollout of the programme, what it enabled to do is really early was start planning the rounds and laying out actually how the operational sort of delivery would work, and how many vehicles we would need. So that has been something that's been kind of instrumental to the rollout of the programme as a whole. So over the period in question, April and May, we've had nearly 200,000 collections of garden waste subscription bins during that period. 4,300 a day on average, given it's a fortnightly collection service. Now, during that period, we've missed an average of 7.5 bins per day across the 5 collection rounds. That amounts to 1 bin in 600 that has been missed. Now, there are a couple of aspects that is higher than we would see normally with our stable waste service. We'll be very open and transparent about that. But there are 2 key elements of that. One is it's a bit of a change for the crews in terms of they're operating both on new rounds, but also only collecting those bins that have subscribed. So it's no longer a simple go to every household, collect every bin. But equally, it's been a bit of a change for residents as well. So actually, as those rounds have changed, potentially for people, the time of day when the bin is collected has changed. And there were instances, where people have said, the bin wasn't collected. And actually, there's photographic evidence that the bin hadn't been presented. Nonetheless, we take this very seriously. Actually, these figures are starting to stabilise. All of this is supported by in-cab technology, which literally tells the crew household by household which bin needs to be collected. But as Councillor Taylor said, the feedback overwhelmingly has been positive from users about the service. So this shows all of the figures that we used on a weekly basis to kind of manage and oversee the delivery of the service. I'll come on a little bit later to talk about how we sort of plan the customer service contact. I think the key thing here is that 2/3 of people who've subscribed to the service did so without speaking to anyone at all. So they took advantage of the digital design, signing up at a time of their convenience, a large amount of take-up of direct debit, which is a really convenient way of signing up for the service. And actually the volume of contact, what it shows is only a very small proportion of people needed to contact us by telephone. And actually when they did, overwhelmingly, they were converted into sales for those people who didn't have digital access or anything else. One of the key aspects of the scheme that was an area of particular interest for members was how we made sure that nobody was excluded who wanted to take use of garden waste. That the garden was a key asset for them, but for whatever reason they didn't want to take advantage of the garden subscription scheme. And we came up with a series of community initiatives that were informed both by feedback from members, but also a whole series of engagement sessions with parish councils and others at various sort of times and over weekends and so on. So one of the key aspects of this was the community freighter scheme. So this is where we take a bin freighter to predefined locations, and people are able to come and dump their green waste free of charge. So latest figures as of today that I have is that we've had 1,291 visits to the community freighters in the first 3 months. We've delivered community freighters at 54 sites, averaging about 24 visits to the freighter per time they're in a location. You can see some of the sort of feedback there from members of the public. It's gone down overwhelmingly positively so far. People are reporting a really sort of positive experience. And again, their complete openness and transparency in terms of the kind of cost of delivering that service. And I'd welcome any sort of feedback and reflections from members whose residents have used that. Home composting was another key aspect of the scheme. Again, we've just had an item on local energy partnerships and the contribution to climate change. The most climate beneficial position on waste is the waste that's not generated in the first place. And you'll be well aware that within our performance indicators, total weight of waste generated is one of the key measures we use to try and drive down the total waste as low as we can possibly go. And home composting has been a key part of that. Again, complete transparency there on all of the figures. There is a small kind of nominal charge for the recycling bins, £10 plus delivery. Again, one of the feedback from other areas, and the reason for that is if you give composters out free of charge, unfortunately, everyone tends to apply and then very quickly dispose of them, which actually is counterproductive to what you're trying to do. But that is something that we'd really encourage people to take advantage of as well. Land management and parish councils, again, when we surveyed all of the sites for community freighters, for various reasons, there were various communities where there was no safe location to park a freighter and enable people to bring waste along. I remember Councillor Corley in particular was particularly sort of interested in this as part of the scheme, and we've introduced this. As Councillor Taylor says, subscriptions take-up of this service has been relatively low. Now, as long as it's reaching the right areas, that's not a problem. You know, all of the parishes were involved in the design of that scheme. And again, what you can see there is feedback in terms of household recycling centres. In terms of actually what the county council is saying is, you know, they're not seeing any significant impact in terms of additional waste going to recycling centres. Whilst you can see on the right that the tonnages going to recycling centres is slightly up, that is within the bounds of kind of seasonal variance that we'd expect to see. So within any waste stream, the amount of waste generated is dictated to a large extent by things like, has it been a busy growing period? If it's been wet, you might get lots of grass. If it's been a nice Easter, for instance, a lot of people go out and trim their hedges. There is a degree of natural seasonality, you know, to that, and that falls very much within those bounds at the moment, and that's the sort of feedback we've had from the county council as well. We'll clearly keep that constantly under review, but 3 months in, you know, we are not seeing anything there that, you know, necessarily, you know, speaks to something that's, you know, quite a profound difference. Removal of unwanted bins. I remember various conversations about, slightly jokingly, I think Councillor Bywater, you were one of them, about the abandoned shopping trolley hotline type situation. What we didn't want was, you know, abandoned bins, you know, being left across the area, and the removal of bins that are no longer desired has already started. So the teams are going out and collecting those bins from those areas. We've not had any reports that I'm aware of major issues in any areas. But again, we will happily, if there are any raised today, happily respond in those areas if there are any issues of that sort. And again, you can see the number of requests that we've had there for removal of bins. Well, one thing I would add, and it comes back to the first slide, is even at this point, 3 months in, we're still seeing increase in subscriptions. So, you know, around somewhere between 200, 250 subscriptions a week going up. And that was one of the things that when we said about we won't take bins away immediately, because actually people might change their minds, you know, actually we are seeing, you know, that being borne out by what we're seeing in terms of the number of subscriptions. Fly tipping was a major concern again from councillors, and rightly so, when we work so hard to keep the areas of clean and green. Again, very transparent numbers here in terms of the number of fly tipping incidents. You can see, you know, in some areas actually they're lower than they were in the previous year. And whilst the number of sort of green waste fly tips is up slightly in May. Again, it kind of comes under that seasonal kind of characteristic of there are natural peaks and troughs in some of those areas. And I wouldn't say, you know, that in itself indicates a major issue. What I have personally ensured is that when you look at the quarterly performance reports, we do report fly tips. But in the commentary that runs alongside them, I've asked for a figure to be included explicitly about any green waste fly tips. So again, if there's any changes that we see as this enters BAU, that'll be completely transparent to you, and you can ask questions in those areas as we move forward. So this is just a little bit more on the customer service approach. Any changes, and I'm acutely aware of this, through my time in the council, any change around waste is very, very, it has a high level of public interest and a high level of public contact tends to flow from that. So in the design of the scheme, we added 5 additional members of customer service staff to support that. Actually, given the digital aspect of the service, we probably didn't need as many as we put in, but it's better to err on the side of caution. There is a permanent uplift of 1 additional member of customer service team to manage this kind of demand going forward. But we do continue to sort of, make sure that digital is the default channel for people. We will be contacting all people in early 2025, just to remind them about the next take of their direct debit, to keep them fully informed about that. And again, assisted bin collection options are available for any residents who apply in that area too, so that they all remain as current. And then finally, and again, I know food waste is one area that's been an area of discussion over recent times. You'll be aware as a council, we've worked incredibly hard with the county council to make sure we're one of the early adopters in terms of the introduction of the food waste scheme in line with the DEFRA reforms around simpler recycling plans. I'm pleased to report that we received the £1.8 million worth of food waste funding to fund additional vehicles and collection receptacles in May. And we're working up all the details to go live as soon as we possibly can in terms of the food waste scheme. Funding's available for the ongoing revenue support from April 2026. So that's what we're working towards. Detailed plans are being worked up. Again, what we just need to be aware of is some of the lead times in terms of some of those areas. With an introduction of something as broad and new as this, the lead time on applications for freighters and that kind of stuff is quite long. We're absolutely the front of the queue in terms of some of those areas. But obviously getting the receptacles, getting the vehicles, there is a long lead time of 12 months to 18 months from order to receipt in terms of some of those areas going forward. The advice around food waste into green bins remains the same, which is legally, if you're offering a charged for subscription service for garden waste, it is illegal for you to advise people to put food waste into those bins. And that's the end of the update. I'm more than happy to take any questions on that.
Councillor Bywater.
Yeah, thank you very much, Oliver. It's some of the facts that I'll eat humble pie on some of the stuff that's been produced, like fly tipping, and so it's good to see the report. I think there's 2 questions, or there's a question and a comment really. The first question is in relation to there's no information about the additional tonnage that potentially going into our grey bins now. So I'd like to have seen that, maybe understand a little bit more about what people are putting into their grey bins as opposed to taking it down the tip, and we're moving that. And then in relation to my conversations, Simon, you talked about, what can we do to talk to our parish councils in relation to the centralised local, bins. My conversations, that I can only talk about the conversations that I've been having at the 20-odd parish councils that I go to, is that there's a reluctance for them to do it because they're worried about where they're storing them, bins going missing, contamination, and then the issues of contamination, who's responsible. Parish councils don't want to become, to pay for that contamination that's put into those bins because people just turn up, chuck whatever they want into it. So that alone is the biggest reservation that the parish councils have got, really, and that's just my feedback, really, from what I'm hearing, really. So I'll be happy to hear your comments.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bywater. So thank you for the feedback on the additional tonnage into the grey bins. It's not included. I don't have the figures at my fingertips. What I can say is it is one of the key metrics within our performance reporting. So it'll be a standard report in terms of the residual waste tonnages. We do expect to see an increase in those areas. I think that's something we've always predicted. But what we also report on is the overall total waste collected through, including recycling and residual waste. So looking at those 2 figures, I think you'll absolutely be able to get the picture, and I can take that away and come back to you specifically on that. In terms of the feedback from the parish councils, I take that on board, absolutely recognise that feedback. I think all I would say is I think you know how hard we worked in terms of developing these proposals in line with the parishes of working on that. I think the level of take-up probably has mitigated some of the need in some of those areas for those, for those additional things that, over 50% of households having taken it up. There perhaps is less need than perhaps we predicted at the start of it. But again, I will take it away and see if there's anything we can do to support parishes on that.
Yeah, I guess that's okay for the Sawtreys and the Stiltons that have got the freighters turning up every month, and I think the level of concern that I still hear of is residents, those residents with disabilities or frail, the elderly who cannot get to the freighters in the bigger villages. But I'm also talking about the small villages, your Great Giddings, your Wood Waltons, all the little ones where, there's lots of elderly residents, they haven't got a freighter. What's happening to that waste? And if you want us to go to these parish councils, we've got to have clear direction so they understand that, really, because they're telling me they're worried about A, where they can put them because they're only small parishes, and B, what potentially goes in them, really.
Any other questions or comments on this paper? Oh, Simon. Excuse me, Councillor Tate.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. What I would suggest is there's always a will to try something. So if the parish council wanted to try it, maybe with one bin, and see how they got on with that. If it doesn't work, then there's kind of no loss, because actually it might work. Give themselves a few months to see if it works, with maybe one or two bins.
Look, I'm not, I'm never one of fixed mindset. You've both known me long enough to do that. I think this is about how you approach the parish councils, how we tell them, because I think, lots of them thinking they're going to have 6, 8 bins. I'm not averse to that. I think those are the conversations that the district council need to be having with the parish council. That may be a way around it, Simon, that they have one bin, see how it goes. I think it's, they're all under pressure, especially some of the smaller ones that have got tiny precepts, a couple £100 for, the bigger parishes, and that is not a great deal. But, for the real small parishes, the parish meetings and that, we really need to be pushing those discussions, really. I can't do that because I can't promise it, but you can.
That's really helpful feedback. And I think, through the likes of Heidi Field and the team, we do an awful lot in engagement in terms of these areas. And I think just hearing you sort of explain that situation there, in many ways, it kind of speaks to me of community litter picks and kind of what we're doing in those areas. And I think one of the things we absolutely can do is look at how we could work with the community potentially to support some of those residents within the communities. And again, that kind of enabling and influencing aspect of things and looking at these slightly creatively. So more than happy to reach out and try and get to a solution to some of those uses that you've mentioned.
Councillor Auburn.
Thank you, Chair. Concerned to hear reports of freighters having to make more frequent trips back to depots because they're getting filled up or the weight limit's being reached because more waste is going in grey bins that would have gone in the green bins. Can you?
Those reports haven't reached me. Those reports haven't reached me, Councillor Auburn. So I'm more than happy to go and check with Andy and the team, but no reports of that sort have reached me.
Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. It's actually a question about the process as such. If a resident moves and they move there, they inform the council for council tax purposes, does that automatically move the green bin registration, or do they have to do that as a separate entity?
It's a really good question. So do you know the answer, Simon?
As far as I know, no, they're not linked. I may be stood corrected or sat corrected, but I asked this question myself to waste minimisation. Because one of my residents were, I don't want to sign up, say if I move, I'm in the middle of processing, building another house, I might move. I asked that question and they said, just contact the council and they will move the subscription over to their new property. So as far as I know, they're not linked at the moment. You never know.
Councillor Motball.
Thank you, Chair. My question from another councillor, actually, it was some people who have signed up haven't received their stickers yet, but does that, surely it should be on the system for the Frighter, so does that mean they still get collected or not?
So simply, it's fully electronic. So the fact you haven't had your sticker, if you've paid, your bin will still be collected. Where we've had reports of this, and it's something we've looked into. Largely, it's just a bit of a lag. It takes around about 8 days. 8 to 10 days for the stickers to arrive, but once you've paid, you'll be added to the scheme, and it'll be fully digital, as I've said. So that in cab, it'll show that your bin should be collected.
Thank you. Can we just get some comms out maybe to do with the stickers, and also if you're moving, for renters as well, if they're moving houses, then they can switch their bins over to the new address.
Thank you, Councillor Motball. Oliver?
Yeah, sorry, very briefly, just to be really clear on your question, Councillor Shaw. So the question on the linkages is one thing, but the transferring of your subscription is absolutely, it's a given. You can absolutely transfer it somewhere else. I'll take it away and just see if we can fully automate that, so we link the two and prevent a call. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Shaw again?
More of a comment than anything. I think that the home composting bins is massively. Not many people know about it. I've spoken to many people about it, and they haven't got the foggiest. So I just encourage all my colleagues. When I saw this report, it reminded me, and I put it in my parish council report just to tell parish councillors so that they're aware and they can pass information on. And the only other, it was just in the report, was the I know the volume of fly tips hasn't changed, but I was quite astounded that we had 500 odd fly tips in a month. I thought that was a massive figure, and I was totally unaware that there was that much work for officers to undertake. So just a comment.
Yeah, I am aware, and you've mentioned in the presentation that there's going to be plans to introduce curbside food waste collection as part of simpler recycling. Do we have a timeline for that?
So the funding from the government to support the ongoing sort of revenue cost of collection is introduced in April 2026. So that's where we are. We're currently working up our plans actively at the moment. So doing all the work we did on this, which is calculating tonnages, what vehicles do we need, what would the rounds look like, all of those aspects are currently being developed. With the introduction of anything new like this that will require new vehicles, as I've said on presentation, there is quite a lead time in terms of when you think about, all 365 councils, in the UK will be introducing this. Everyone's going to the same suppliers looking for receptacles, looking for vehicles. So the lead time on receptacles is about 12 months, on vehicles is about 18 months. We remain convinced that we can get it by April 2026, but we are obviously dependent on those things coming through.
Can I just come back on Councillor Shaw's comments? So with the compost bins, they are advertised on our website. But if you feel that maybe, obviously with the other comms that we're looking at, that we could put out a bit more information about that, maybe on social media or something like that, that would be probably helpful than just our website.
Councillor Orban.
Thank you, Chair. Has there been any consideration or reconsideration being given to making the payments available to be made monthly? It's just under a £5 a month. It's probably more affordable. It's probably more manageable in some cases than £57.50 in one go for those on a really low income.
So it was something that was a lot of thought, time and effort went into, Councillor Alban, in terms of the design of the scheme. One of the issues is the overall kind of cost of administering and supporting the scheme, and the issue around it's sort of linked slightly to the issues around movement. of as soon as you pay on a monthly basis, the overhead involved in making sure that payments have been received, that you're not collecting bins from someone who hasn't made a payment, are so significant that you start to create an industry around a team needed to constantly monitor and update, making sure that people have got the right amounts of money in their account and so on. And it's that challenge, which is why I'm not aware of any other a council that does it in that way, and that's why we ended up with the range of options to try and mitigate that. I think the other two things I'd mention is the early bird discount obviously was to try and sort of lock in the cheapest possible option for people, but also options like the ability to share a bin with a neighbour and other areas, which again, we're very much informed to try and make sure that as much as possible, no one was locked out for financial reasons.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor, have you? Councillor Shaw?
It's sort of linked to Councillor Hunt's comment about the obviously introduction of food waste collections. It mentions that obviously there's restrictions because there's a current contract in place that prevents us from doing that. When's that up for renewal? I.e., when would the process start for looking at providing a service?
So this is something called the Waste PFI, so the Waste Private Finance Initiative, which is, we're a waste collection authority. The County Council is the Waste Disposal Authority, and they signed a long-term contract that guaranteed all waste generated in the area to that provider. Now, this was one of the reasons why we had to push quite hard to make sure we were one of the early adopters to the scheme, and food waste will be introduced from 2026, because there was actually provision in the legislation that if you did have a long-term contract of the sort that we have in the county, you could end up not having food waste right until the end of the contract. So that's the kind of background. Now, what we'd approached the county to say was there any chance that what we could do was run a pilot on food waste collection ahead of the introduction in 2026? So it's the PFI scheme that has prevented us from doing that. So we haven't been able to pilot it in the way that we want. Our expectation is the county will have resolved all of those issues, and they're currently actively working on that contract. So by 2026, it won't be an issue.
Councillor Tevlin.
I was just wondering, with the scheme and the community initiative of having up to 10 bins, I know in my ward there's been one village has gone for it and the other has been more cautious. I was just wondering on the sort of data and the uptake of that, and has that been successful yet?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Tevlin. So let me just jump back to the slides and just quote the exact figures in terms of 7. So we've so far had 7 parishes take up that offer. Again, I remember it being Councillor Lowe was one of the people who kind of suggested this as as an area to reflect on. And obviously every parish is different, as Councillor Bywater has laid out. But we know that in some areas there are community initiatives to kind of maintain common land and sort of community work parties and that kind of thing. And I think it's probably those areas where the community bins have been quite a welcome option and been taken up. They're open to everyone, but I appreciate that for some that perhaps they're not the way they want to go forward.
Is there a way of collating feedback on that from the parishes to determine whether they are successful?
So we certainly have engaged. So I mentioned Heidi Field earlier, who's our waste minimisation officer. We have been in active conversation with all of the parishes. We've promoted this. We've given it a push. I don't have the feedback to hand, but I can certainly go away and see what feedback we've had.
Councillor Bywater.
Yeah, sorry to come back in. Claire's questions have just brought something back to my mind, really, in relation to churches. I know a particular church in my village of Sawtree. They have a green bin that they obviously can't afford to pay for it, but it gets filled up by relatives from deceased families coming to lay flowers on the gravesides, and then the flowers get put into their green bin, and then there's an issue of disposal, really. Is there any dispensation for churches to be able to do that, given that, you know, that their bins fill up generally with flowers from funerals, etc.
Let me take it away. The issue of these things is that as soon as you create a precedent, obviously we'll have everyone else kind of coming forward. But my instinct is there might be an opportunity between the 2 points we're discussing here, which is if a parish were to nominate one of their bins to a local church, for instance, that might be a way through it that kind of resolves this issue in a way that works for everyone.
Yeah, I promise to be very short. I think I'm trying to encourage those discussions to take place. So if you could follow it up, that would be really useful, Oliver. Thank you.
Has anyone got any other questions or comments? In that case, thank you, Oliver and Councillor Taylor. And I'm very encouraged. My comment is I'm very encouraged, especially by the low number of green fly tips, because I think that was everyone's biggest concern. And actually, at the moment, it's looking like Andy was right, and what he saw from the other people who had green service, it really wasn't an issue. So that's really encouraging. So moving on to item 9, Community Health and Wealth Building Strategy Principles. Councillor Pitt and Oliver again will be giving us a presentation.
Good evening, councillors. So I'd like to start. Has anyone here seen a film called The Pursuit of Happiness? It's 2006. Starring Will Smith and his son, a very young son. So I've got a terrible reputation for giving away spoilers, so I'll try not to do that. But for those who might not have seen it, so Will Smith's character finds himself homeless and lands an internship at a stockbroker, but it's an unpaid role, so he spends most of the film trying to pretend that he's, not destitute to his new colleagues. Now, the thing that brought this back to mind was, I remember, I think it was either a review or a comment that somebody said that the film should have been called The Pursuit of Money, because really the whole story was about him trying to, find an income. But I remember reflecting on that at the time, and actually, I guess I believe that vast riches aren't necessarily the source of great joy and happiness. But actually, if you're destitute, if you're homeless, if you're in significant hardship and poverty, money is the solution to an awful lot of your problems, So if you basically can't afford the basics, you're worrying about how you're going to pay the rent or your council tax bill. You're worried if your washing machine's about to break and you can't afford a new one. These are the things that, dominate your life. So the report that you have in front of you sets out how life expectancy is inversely linked to financial deprivation. So in the bluntest terms, the wealthier people tend to live longer. And that's why we're making employment and skills one of the key objectives of our emerging community health and wealth building strategy. There are two other focuses to this new emerging strategy document, and they are physical activity and social connection. So as we'll hear in a few minutes, these are areas that can have just as much of an impact on a person's health as their access to clinical care. Physical activity not only improves physical health, but also mental health. And it's also an area that HGC has a lot of impact and experience in. So we have our One leisure centres, our active lifestyles teams, and our parks and open spaces. As a council, we're also really well connected to our community groups. So this stretches back for many years, but was particularly significant during COVID, the pandemic, and our recognised organisations' work. And then more recently with Warm Spaces, which we've now rebranded Community Spaces. So there's lots of evidence, but as councillors, I think we probably all know this instinctively, that social connection is a key determinant to the quality of life. Having a support network, whether it's family, friends, neighbours, community groups, sports clubs or faith organisations, has a direct link to well-being. And it also has a direct correlation to positive health outcomes. So these three themes, employment and skills, physical activity, and social connection, are the focus of our new strategy. Now, I'm a great believer in talking to the experts, and I'm delighted that our corporate director for people sitting to my left is expertly placed to do the research and the strategy development to get to grips with some of the big issues. And to answer that question that sits in our corporate plan, how do we meaningfully improve the quality of life for local people? And to do that at scale and in ways that are affordable and sustainable. And so together we've developed these 3 themes, and also we're starting to develop a methodology to address them. But beyond that, I really want us to talk to the experts who understand what are the barriers to deliver on these themes. And those experts are local people. They don't want the council to tell them to be more active or how to be more active. But we can flip that question and say, if you want to be more active, what are the barriers? And then we can reflect on how we as a council, maybe directly or through our influencing and enabling ways of working, can help to remove those barriers. And we've also got some experts in the room this evening. You know, as ward members and as councillors, you know your local neighbourhoods, your wards, your residents really well. So we're looking on to, you know, through this process of overview and scrutiny panel to input into this policy as we develop it, but also to help us to find those local people, to find a really good mix of demographics across our district, to understand their views. So I will hand over to Oliver. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pitt. I'm conscious that people might not be as keen to get home tonight as they perhaps were last night, but I'm equally very clear that this is standing between you and your, your warm homes. I think really the Word document kind of speaks for itself. What we've brought this here today to do is to get your input into the principles that are likely to inform the community health and wealth building strategy before we bring it back. So to make sure you've had a chance to kind of input into it in the way that Councillor Pitt has just outlined. There's a lot of slides here, but what I wanted to do was just have the chance to use them to kind of illustrate some of the points and help to kind of navigate you through what could be quite an abstract kind of piece of work. So I'm not intending to dwell on every slide, but just to try and indicate the kind of points that we're after. As Councillor Pitt's outlined, really what all of this is about is how do we contribute to the success of our residents and communities. That's what we're trying to achieve. And it clearly links into the Journeys in the Place strategy that was presented last night in terms of inclusive economy, health embedded and pride of place. So what we're sort of looking to do today is explain the approach we're proposing, and what areas are we exploring so far, and how will we develop the kind of the health and wealth building strategy as we move forward. Some of you might be aware of the concept of community wealth building, which is increasingly well established, which simply is around how do large public sector organisations positively contribute to outcomes for local people. Some of you might have heard of the model of anchor institutions or whatever. What we're trying to do is say very clearly, what are the outcomes we're looking to achieve for our residents? How can we as public sector organisations better achieve those? That's the community wealth building aspect. But fundamentally, how do we do that community co-production with our residents to be able to support them to achieve the outcomes they want? And for all the reasons already outlined on the conversation about garden subscription, the needs of certain communities are different from others. And unless we're asking the questions around what are the barriers, what are the things in your way, we're unlikely to get there. So I'll lay out those things, talk about how we propose to measure success and how local people will benefit. And some of you, Councillor Bywater in particular, will recognise this slide, and this is very much that kind of focus on root cause and social determinant aspect of the community health and wealth building strategy. Now, this was part of our community transition strategy, which we adopted in October 2021. Now, fundamentally, what this approach does is it puts the resident at the heart of everything, not the council, not any other public sector organisation. It's the resident and their family, and asks the question, how do we better support residents to achieve the outcomes that are in their best interests? And fundamentally, that is the kind of the cornerstone of why this strategy exists, and everything else is about how do we amplify that more. So that focus on root causes has been well established. What we're trying to do with the health and wealth building strategy is take that intent and see how do we as a council, but also how do we influence other partners like the county council, like North West Anglia Foundation Trust, to also be considering the choices they make and how that supports the quality of life and success of our local residents too. I think I've covered this, responding to those 3 things. I'll skip through that quickly. And one of the things I'm conscious of is sometimes we get asked the question, I get asked the question, we speak about health a lot. Why are we speaking about health? The council doesn't really do health. And I think one of the reasons why we talk about wider determinants or the determinants of health is most of the research around what things contribute to a good life largely linked to health research. And brutally and rather sadly, there are a couple of reasons for that. It's very easy to quantify when someone dies, and it's quite easy to quantify the number of years of good life that someone has. So those metrics become the health determinants, but really, we'd all know them as the determinants to live to a happy and fulfilling life. But this diagram, for me, starts to show how if you talk to them as the determinants of health, or if you took things like education, income and employment there, or environment, transportation and housing, I would say they were the determinants of economic success. So your education, how that links to your income opportunity, how you get to work and those kind of factors. And actually that interlocking element of a lot of these things are very closely aligned, and they're in all our interests to make sure they happen. How do we ensure the entire kind of ecosystem works to support those? Now, just to speak very briefly about why we're proposing those areas of focus that Councillor Pitt outlined. This is a kind of percentage distribution informed by a lot of evidence about what contribution do certain factors make to quality of life and life expectancy. Now, around about 30% of your overall sort of quality of life is linked to your education and skills, bluntly. So your income, your education and your employment. So the more we can do to improve your employment, ultimately, the more we contribute to your quality of life and health. Physical activity is a key driver of health too, about 25%, and then social connection. So, we know that, the impact of loneliness can be as great as smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of your health, in terms of the damage that causes. That's the reason that we did all the things during COVID that Councillor Pitt outlined, but the reason as well that during our community warm spaces, which Councillor Kerr, you're heavily involved with, we did that through the community to try and create enduring relationships between residents and those community groups that run them, rather than run them as statutory providers when the money runs out, close the door. And I think that, again, this is just reiterating this kind of message going through. But I think it's important throughout all of these things that this is not just a kind of a bleeding heart, kind of liberal or a warm-hearted thing. There are hard economics behind this. The impact of people being out of work are absolutely significant. So a major review back in 2011 calculated the loss of economic production through ill health at about £63 billion. And again, trying to create the conditions for success in large way will go to minimising impact here. These three areas in terms of the focus of the strategy as well link very closely to our objectives as a council. So when you think about employment and skills, both in terms of our economic development aspirations, but also in terms of things like the business rates receipts that sort of support our overall budget. In terms of physical activity, we've got a large leisure operation, we've got open spaces. But clearly, driving up usage of physical activity is likely to see more people coming through the doors of our leisure centres and supporting other areas too. And finally, social connection. Both delivers better outcomes, but it also, I think supports, and the evidence shows, supports those vibrant communities that are great places to live and that deliver great lives for people. And I think anything we can do on that is significant. But when we look at things we've done like community health initiatives that we've run with project funding, as many people say they come and do the health project to meet other people and make friends as do it because they want to do the exercise. And again, it's just seeing those link between those areas and trying to support those. Okay, so if that's a bit about the what and the wider determinants, the next bit's the community wealth building aspects. And largely it's an approach pioneered by an organisation called the the Local Economic Success organisation they're CLES that's designed this. But fundamentally what it's about is asking the question that how do public sector organisations influence, benefit in local areas by making decisions on things like the people they employ, how they buy things, how they use their lands, and the decisions they make in how they run their day-to-day services. Now, we already have commitments to reviewing our social value policy, reviewing our commercial investment strategy and other areas, which already showed a commitment in this area. This is just about seeing about how we can extend some of those arrangements. So they're the five pillars of community wealth building, which are listed in the report. But these are the results that an approach like this can deliver. And in a time of which budgets are tight, looking at every opportunity to improve outcomes is critical. What I would say in terms of Preston is it is a district council like ours, with a smaller population than ours. But taking an approach like this and thinking about how they employ people and the focus on the things that they want to deliver, they've delivered a £70 million boost in terms of the local economy for that area. They've created 1,600 more jobs. Now, again, with Councillor Pitt's introduction, those are people whose lives will be enhanced by this approach, by not spending more money, but just by spending it differently and making sure we're leveraging some of those areas. And again, thinking about some of the work that Councillor Criswell did historically and things like Think Communities, it's very much in line with those kind of historic approaches. So again, this is a table in the report. There's a lot of detail here, but it takes us the kind of cross-cutting, the slices here, the running across those 5 themes in the community wealth building strategy, but then thinks about how can we actually, deploy those in practice. So we've talked about social value in procurement. So bluntly, what do we look for when we sign contracts? If we buy things from local suppliers, that's far more likely to support local jobs than buying from Amazon. That is likely to see a lot of that money flying back to the west coast of America, for instance. So where are there areas where we can do that? And the rules we set about what we want to see in terms of local employment, for instance, can do a lot to boost those local employment figures. And there's some of the things that Preston have done. Looking at our own employment practices and the decisions we make in terms of pay awards and those kind of things. One of the really, really significant areas here is the rebuild of Hinchinbrook Hospital. Sorry, I spent a lot of time talking about Hinchinbrook Country Park. And making sure that £750 million investment that will be built by 2030 is maximising the benefit in terms of local employment and local health outcomes. And then finally, the last leg of the stool is the community co-production aspect. And as Councillor Pitt has said, it's all well and good wanting those outcomes to residents, but we do not have all the answers. And going right back to the start, one of the principles of our old community transition strategy was making sure we support residents to succeed. And the key part of this is making sure we're engaging with residents to understand the barriers and what are the things that get in the way and prevent some of these, their access to employment or physical activity or social connection, and what can we do to unlock some of those things is one of the key things that we want to do. And that's absolutely in line with the HDC engagement principles that we developed last September, and which were approved, and moving into that deciding together space of a very open engagement with all partners of saying, actually, what could we do to support your quality of life? Recognising that as district council, we can't do it alone, but also recognising that for most residents, they don't understand or can distinguish between what a county council does, what a district council does, what a parish council does, what health does, what the DWP does. And actually hearing those answers in the round will enable us to influence partners who will also be in the room and influence some just day-to-day delivery as well as the shape of the strategy and projects going forward. So just skipping on to the working with partners aspect, and this is critical, and again, this is the influence enable aspect of the strategy overall. In the development of this, we've been in very, very active conversation with a range of partners who are very supportive of this. So we've had very constructive conversations with the Combined Authority. Claire's have done a lot of work with combined authorities elsewhere on supporting health outcomes. We think there's a real opportunity for for work there. The county council historically have done a lot of work on community wealth building, and in effect, the idea is it will become a common language of what we're trying to achieve moving forward. The North West Anglia Foundation Trust, and again going back to that £750 million investment in Hinchinbrook that's planned, are very supportive of this approach and keen to sign up, and Cambridge City are pursuing this already as well. So how will we measure success, and why are we doing this? It's very much going back to those slides on Preston and what they saw. So how can we improve that quality of life? How can we drive up employment and local average household income, boosting physical employment, and trying to work on the back of the feedback to deliver more sort of joined up services that make sense to residents and meet their needs rather than the way that we would traditionally deliver services. More local public sector jobs accruing to local residents, more spend with local businesses, driving up the percentage spend that we have with local businesses and that of partners, and ultimately improving quality of life and being more transparent about how we operate as an organisation. Again, here's a slightly worked example in terms of some of those things around some of the benefits that would flow on an example of such as Hinching which is even if 1 or 2% more of that £750 million spend is retained in Huntingdonshire, the impact on local jobs, upskilling, what that means in terms of the long-term employment prospects for residents is likely to be really, really significant. And this just starts to kind of spell out some of those areas. Now, again, I don't intend to go through these in detail at all, but again, just some indicative sort of thoughts about the potential opportunities for various groups of people. This kind of scenario planning is exactly what we did when we planned the garden waste subscription service, of considering, how it will affect various people and what's in it for them. Now, the final thing is just to talk about the timeline and seek some feedback. So the principals are here today for your discussion and feedback. Strategy development will take place over the summer, so we'll do that community co-production in terms of getting some demographically representative groups together, asking them their questions and getting that feedback on how they think we could unlock some of those areas. We propose to work up some of those proposals into some of those specific areas we'll be looking to work on, so social procurement policy and other areas, and then to work up the detailed strategy to bring back to you on the 5th of September, hopefully for endorsement and support, so we can start to see some of those benefits flowing through. So I'll stop at that point, but hopefully that's given you a feel for the approach. And I'm more than happy to go back to any slides if anyone's got any questions.
Councillor Hunt.
I think if I can just open by saying, kind of linked to what we were saying about the Scrutiny work plan earlier, I'm really glad this is coming in principles kind of form at the minute and coming back. I know that a lot of panel members have said that they wanted things to come in a slightly more formative state and to have a chance, because we felt like previously we'd missed a boat. Highly encourage members to get this opportunity to get in there, get their thoughts in there. So yeah. I think overall, brilliant stuff. I know we've seen a lot of those graphics before, and we've said before, and to say it bluntly again, in Britain generally, the richer you are, the healthier you are. It's that simple. For these sport. The question I've got is, I appreciate your reference to mental health at the start, Councillor Pitt. It's just kind of, how can we make sure that physical and mental health are handled on the kind of same parity throughout this kind of document? Because I know obviously they're intrinsically linked. Typically people with better physical health have better mental health and so on and so forth. Is there a way that we can make sure they're treated with the same parity throughout?
So I'll take the first bite of that, Councillor Hunt. I think what the evidence shows is that those factors that contribute to good mental health are broadly the factors that we're embedding here. So if you're struggling to put food on the table, understandably, your mental health is likely to be a lot worse. Similarly, social connection, having a support network, friends and family to spend time with, it is a core contributor, as is physical health and time out in nature are some of those contributing factors. So please be assured that trying to address some of those factors, which ultimately drives quality of life to a large extent, is absolutely core here. Now, we're always keen to help on the other side of the equation too. So when people are actually already suffering poor mental health, to try and do things. I think we do need to be cautious, knowing, we're acutely aware of the level of demand in terms of mental health, but of not stepping into the space that is rightly health's, but rather staying in that preventative space and trying to stop things getting to that place in the first area would be the slightly dull officer response. But I'm sure Councillor Pitt's got a much more nuanced political one.
Thank you. Yeah, so I was going to reflect on, I think I've heard the expression a few times in this council about trying to boil the ocean, and, we need to be targeted and realistic in what we can achieve. But I totally accept your point that I think mental health is as acute a challenge for our local people as physical health. So I guess we use the words physical activity rather than physical health quite pointedly as a lever that, collectively we as a population can draw on. But also the point of the engagement over the summer is, to test what are the avenues we can, that people recognise. And I think that's going to be I can imagine that'll be a bit of feedback that I would expect. So we've identified 3 things we think are really important, and we want to know how we can help in those 3 areas. But at the same time, if people say, well, actually, you've missed something really important, then I dare say that will come through in that consultation process, or co-production, I should say.
Councillor Tevlin and then Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. I think this is really comprehensive and really great work. I just want to make an observation. So in my ward, they're building a private dental practice. I'm just about to lose my NHS dental place. The word dental does not feature in this report. Is there a way we can allocate a specific priority to dentistry within this and the physical health? Because I know it comes under that, and I know you're working with health with this, but I do realise that in our communities, particularly in Huntingdonshire, the state of dentists is a significant issue as well. So just to highlight that. Thanks.
I think it's a really good point. So I would absolutely acknowledge the sort of challenge in terms of dental access, I think, both locally and nationally. So I absolutely recognise that. I think probably my response would be slightly similar to my response to Councillor Hunt, which is you please be assured that we raise issues like that on a regular basis, with health in terms of the concerns we've got. But I think we've got to be careful of not stepping into that kind of clinical delivery space. And I think the prevention aspects of here should improve dental health overall. So again, people who are sort of happier, have more money, better diets are likely to have better dental health. But perhaps this is not the best way of trying to deliver that kind of dental recovery plan, which I think is rightly a sort of health area. But again, I'm more than happy to bring that back in other areas or perhaps to speak to health about coming and giving an update on that, if that would be helpful.
Councillor Shaw.
Short. Yeah, a good piece of work. I particularly like the investing in local businesses. Such a simple concept that by putting money into these local businesses, you're essentially getting the money back again by different routes. The other thing I just wanted to comment on was the on page 104. It says, "What does success look like for residents?" It says, "See more local people gaining local public sector jobs." Does HDC have a local employment policy? And is it even possible with employment law? You can't know how old somebody is or various things. Can you employ somebody on the basis of their locality to your business? Is that something that's possible?
It's an excellent question. So the reason it says local public sector jobs is we think we've got more controllability over the public sector jobs than we do the commercial sector jobs. But exactly to your first point, if we're spending more money locally, I'd also expect to see more commercial sector jobs generated on the back of this. So in terms of local employment, we can't restrict. So what we can't say is we'll only employ people from a Huntingdonshire postcode. However, what we absolutely know is that there are hard to recruit jobs in the public sector system overall that are crying out for skilled people to do them. And we can absolutely build those pathways that encourage people who would benefit from a job into them. Like one example that I tend to overuse is Northwest Anglia Foundation Trust employed 100 Portuguese nurses recently. Less than a year later, fewer than a handful of those people were still here with all of the cost of locating them, relocating them, everything else. Because they didn't have the social network, the housing, the other factors, actually, I think there'd be far more of those people still in those roles if they'd be people who were already living in the community and were actually keen to do those great jobs in a local area and give something back. So I think it'd be those kind of areas, which is the way we'd be looking to achieve it.
Councillor Mutball.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Pitt first.
So just to build on that, so I think the answer is essentially you're right. We can't restrict where we recruit, but what we can do is look at, be proactive in terms of employment and training and those sort of opportunities. So we recognise there's a gap in the skills market, so we can develop policies to say, where can we go and actively recruit, and that can be much more locally focused.
Thank you. I don't know actually if this is maybe a private conversation between me and Samine, but I'd like to see our leisure facilities bring back the crash, because I've had a lot of people come to me and say because they've not been able to find childcare, they can't access our one leisure facilities, and I think it's really important. And the second thing is I'd like to see a bit more research into the health inequalities between the South Asian community as well, because there is a lot of stigma against mental health in the South Asian community, and I think we just need to be, do a bit more research and maybe get people speaking about that.
I was just to let on that, One Leisure has been transferred. I've tried to keep this as quiet as possible, but that's now in my portfolio. So I'm community health and leisure. So I'll pick up that one. But you're not the first person that's mentioned about the creches. So that's something that's definitely on my radar. Yeah, thank you.
Again, an excellent question. Councillor Pitt's modest. We've actually got a full day touring all of our leisure facilities tomorrow. So I'm sure creches, amongst other things, will be areas of sort of focus and discussion. I think one of the aspects that led to decisions on the creches, before Councillor Pitt's time, was just the need for the service to be financially sustainable, and that remains a real focus and lots of work in that area. However, leisure is key, both in terms of physical activity, but also social connection and other things. And I think one of the things we're really looking at is the more we can drive footfall and make those leisure centres a core part of the community in line with what we're talking about here, the more those creches or hospitality areas become self-sustaining in terms of attracting people who want to use them. So we remain open and really working hard to see how we can attract families and make our leisure centres really accessible people for everyone moving forward. And your point upon the South Asian community is well made, and it's certainly something that will inform the strategy overall.
Any other questions or comments? On that case, then, thank you so much, Oliver and Councillor Pitt. You know how important this is to me and how I feel about this. Is so conceptual, but it really excites me. This is our vision and this is our aspiration. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions this evening, and I'll draw this meeting to a close.